Got it.
Yeah, now I'm Max Headroom again. A
I
little
know
bit
what's
here.
happening there. What is going
Uh,
on?
so hopefully that will straighten itself out at some point. So, welcome to the Bard Room. We are in the Bard Room with a very good friend of mine that I met at drama school. We're going to call it drama school, God damn it. And so, because it means something
Mhm.
at University of Connecticut. And we're going to go mostly into his Shakespeare Shakespeareans when we get there, and which is interesting because I talked about I mentioned UConn because UConn was extremely classically based when we went. I don't know what's happening to it now, but we had to take classes in how to dance Greek, dance Shakespeare, dance Restoration comedy, how to speak it. Everything was in order of that. So the physicalization of it, the verbalization of it, the voice and diction, the dramaturgy, the history, all of that stuff, which I just fell in love with for some reason. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think there's just so much that you can dive into and not pay for it. But anyway, so you can dive into something like do your own version of Antigone, or do you want a version of School for Scandal or something like that in the classically based stuff. So John and I really got a lot out of that, especially when John was in a lot of productions there. And we roomed together, and I have recently actually, well, it was about 5 years ago. I gave him a call, said, "Hey, do you want to play Caliban up in Sherman, Connecticut at the Sherman Playhouse?" And his family lived around there, so that might work out. And he did it, and he was amazing. So that was an introduction to theater in Connecticut, Northwest Connecticut. And so since then, he's done some other theater up here. He has also just read for a Crucible reading that was fantastic, very big A-list cast, and he read for Danforth. He is also going to be reading for Salieri and another reading at Theater Works New Milford, and then we'll go on and on and on and on because New York City's not that far, is it, John?
It isn't that far.
You can actually get here, right?
It feels far sometimes, Robin, but it isn't that far.
And John gets to stay at these beautiful inns that
Yes.
I never
Yes.
get to stay in, but I'm just jealous. So John, before UConn, did you do theater in high school, and did that have the bug bitten then, or?
I did. I went to public school my whole youth, and when I was in elementary school, I did a couple of plays, and then when I was in high school, I went to a public high school in northwestern Connecticut, and all of my siblings went there, and I remember when I was a kid seeing musicals there. But by the time I got to it, I think they just didn't have the budget to do it anymore, so they were doing straight plays, or whatever the term for that is now.
Yeah.
But I ended up doing Our Town, and weirdly I also did The Skin of Our Teeth, another Thornton Wilder play, which is a very, very weird play, and strange to me that we did it. But no, I had really good experiences, and the English teacher who was the director there really encouraged me to act, and encouraged me to apply to the Wesleyan summer program, which I got into. And at the time, my family just couldn't afford it, so I had to turn it down. But he managed to get me into the acting program at Hotchkiss, which was like a local prep school, really well funded. So I went there between my sophomore and junior years, and it was great because it was kind of the first time that I'd ever been exposed to kids who really just wanted to perform. And also they had like a really like college level, like professional level theater. Yeah. And so it was good exposure to that. So I did act in high school, and I knew that I wanted to pursue it. I had been a good illustrator, and I think a lot of people thought I was probably going to go to art school, but I just felt like, no, I really like performance. And so I applied to UConn, got in, and UConn was really just because I wasn't like a super strong student. I'd done
Mhm.
okay, but I
Mhm.
hadn't done that well, and I think we were just broke, and it was like, okay, this is where I can go. But I have to say that that program was pretty good, and the surprising part when I got there was because I'd gotten advanced placement, I think, out of English or whatever. Um, and so when I got there and I sat down with my advisor, they were like, "Well, here's your courses," and all of them were acting based. Like all of them were drama
Right.
based courses. So I think I was just like kind of shocked that it was like, oh, I'm in college and now I'm just studying the thing that I want to study,
Yeah. Yeah.
which was great. And
Yeah.
it was really an immersive program. I mean, state university or whatever, but it was a really immersive program.
Yeah. And we were talking about it recently, and I think 80% of the staff had doctorates. I
Yeah,
mean,
I think that's right.
you do not have that now.
Yeah,
And
right.
these guys had doctorates, and they were just so brilliant. I think Bob McDonald went to Yale.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, yeah. And then they all did summer stuff, summer stock. They were all professional actors. Dave Catter was a professional actor over at Hartford Stage. Blah blah
Yes, he
blah.
worked at Harvard Stage a lot.
Yep. Yeah, and probably New York too. And they, then they were kind of, I don't want to say they were elderly, but they were older, so they had a lot of experience.
Yeah,
A
we're probably older now than many of them were at that
little
point.
elderly
Yeah,
now, yeah.
yeah,
Um, uh, so yeah, we really got a classically trained
yes.
curriculum there. Okay, so post UConn, where does Mr. Bergdahl go?
So post UConn, I didn't know what to do. So I applied. I went to URTAS, which was University and Regional Theater Auditions,
Mhm.
and I was accepted at a few places. I got accepted at Irvine, Rutgers, and Alabama Shakespeare Festival. So
Mhm.
um, Rutgers and Irvine were Rutgers. I wasn't especially interested in going, although having known somebody that went to that program and having seen work there was really incredible work. Irvine was like a distant world, but the thing was that both of those you had to pay for. Um, Alabama Shakespeare was a stipend. They were very generous. So, not and being pretty naive, having never lived outside of New England at that time, I thought, sure, I can go anywhere and do this. So I moved to Alabama. I quickly left that program because I didn't really feel like it was what they had kind of sold it as.
Mhm.
That being said, I do have some regrets about that because it was 2 calendar years as opposed to 3 academic years,
Yeah,
which most
yeah,
master's programs are.
right,
And coming out of it, I would have had a master's degree, but also an equity card,
right.
um, and connections. And one of my classmates in that, one of the people in my class was Norbert Leo Butz, who's two-time
Right,
Tony Award winning. Um,
right.
so I do have some regrets about kind of bailing on that, but at the time I was just impatient and I just didn't want to be. I didn't like the Deep South. It
Mhm.
just wasn't my place, and so I left. I came back to Connecticut for about 8 months, and then moved to New York with two former um, UConn alumni, and I've been here ever since. I've been here for
Let
30
me
years.
quickly ask you about going to New York, because that was a migration
Hmm.
of our I mean, I graduated after or before you, but that was a migration for everybody that we went to school. Not everybody, but most of these people went to
Yeah,
school with, and they're like, UConn, New York, we're gonna
yeah.
go straight there. And how were they treated in general? I mean, were they getting jobs right away, or were they living out of boxes, or
I think it was. I think it was a mix. I can't really speak for everybody, but I think for me it was like I had a very good academic,
Mhm.
like I had a very good academic resume, and I
Yeah,
think the minute that I got to New York, it was made very clear, like, well, with this face, you're going to be like a guy in a prison cell on Law and Order. You know what I mean? It wasn't
right.
like you're going to play leads anymore.
Mhm.
So so I kind of had to adapt to that. But
Right.
I do think some of them did well. I mean, I think I'm trying to remember, but I think more women that came out of that program
Yeah,
than men did really well. I
yeah,
can't really think of any men that did
yeah,
super well coming out of the program.
right.
But I also would say that as valuable and as good as I honestly think UConn's curriculum was, there were no connections. Like, you didn't come out of that program with any connections.
Right. They were setting us up for Disney World,
Yeah.
Busch
Yes, that's right.
Gardens,
That's right. Yeah,
that
that's
type of thing.
right.
You'll get a job in Busch Gardens. Don't
That's
worry,
right. That's
don't
right.
you worry.
Which maybe I
Could have
should
been
have done
cool.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, you should have pushed it. Uh, how about your audition? Any memories?
Yeah, I mean, I did audition for a little while, and I mean, one, I'm a really bad audition actor. Like, I'm not good at it. It's a process, and I have to say that it's probably the thing that has stopped me over the years from really pursuing acting as my main profession, because I'm bad at it. I don't like auditioning. I think it's really hard, and I think certain actors are great at it.
Hmm.
But I think sometimes you see those actors later and you're like, they've kind of fooled me in this in that process. Like they're better audition actors than they are necessarily
Hmm.
at playing a role. That's not true of everybody. But for me, I always felt like it's a really hard process. I remember going to a few of them and just feeling bad. And it was really that kind of slap in the face moment of like, oh yeah, I don't know that I'm cut out for this business. I trust myself as an actor, and I think that I'm skilled that way, but I don't really like this process, and I don't think I'm good at it.
Right.
And that was brought home, I think, pretty soon. New York
Hmm.
is just one of the, I mean, everywhere you audition, but New York, I think, is particularly like that. I'm sure LA is too. But you learn quickly, like, you either can deal with that process and you have like the emotional armor to deal with it, or you don't. And I just don't think I did. So I ended up writing and producing plays that I could be in, and I did that for about 10 years.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sent me a couple of them like that. Oh my God, he can do playwriting too. You know, they were just amazing. And in
Oh, well,
fact,
thanks. Thank you.
I do want to talk to you about putting some of them up somewhere, but
Sure.
well, I don't know if I have the money for your royalties. Uh,
I think you
they're
probably do.
expensive.
Yeah, I think you probably do.
Yeah, I probably do. Anyway, yeah. So and in that vein, you started a band. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had been writing and producing one acts in New York, which was kind of a, when I first started doing. I mean, I have to say that I moved to New York in June, and that actual December, I did the first plays that I produced in New York, and
Right.
but at that time there was kind of places where you could sort of, it wasn't pay to play, but it was like the
Right.
Village Gate was kind of suffering, and they just didn't, it was like this legendary jazz club, but they weren't doing well. So they had one act nights. You would submit them, they would accept you, and it was kind of like comedy, where it's like stand-up comedy, where it was like, yeah, you can do this play, but you got to bring this many people. And so those did
Right.
okay.
Right.
And then I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna produce, I'm just gonna get my own theater. So that was a kind of a financial hardship, but I liked it. You would pay whatever amount of money it was, and you'd get these small theaters, and you'd have to, often based on your cast, you would sometimes have to get equity showcase status or whatever. But they were always money losing situations, but they were fun, you know what I mean? Because it was your work, and you had control over it. And so I did that for a long time. I did that for 10 years.
Well,
And
did you have a home base for that?
no, I worked at a
Okay.
few different places. I worked at different theaters, and I worked at one theater a couple of times on 23rd Street. But I produced stuff around, sort of like in that part of Manhattan, like
Okay.
in the 20s, whatever. Because there was a bunch of theaters, a bunch of smaller theaters there at the time. But then about 7 years into that process, I was working in a production studio, and I met these really fascinating men, dear friends of mine still, and we all kind of wanted to start a band. We did that. We started a band called Legion, and it was kind of it was a very difficult project to kind of pin down, because it was sort of a parody, but we were writing very sincerely, and We were this fake German sort of hard rock band. We did very well initially, and we had a little following around New York. And for me, it was really this kind of I got to do everything that I wanted to do. I got to do all the graphic art for the band. I got to I made movies for that project, like sort of small narrative films that were based around the band, and I've done that for 20 some years. I've made 25 short films about that band over the years. So I got to kind of direct and write and be a graphic artist and perform. And the beautiful part about being in a band was, if a club liked you, they'd book you. Like, you didn't have to pay for it. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to sign any contracts. It was just like, you got to do it. And so it was this real moment of like, oh, I like everything that I'm doing here. Like, these are all of my interests in one thing. The sort of bummer part about that is that, like, if you're not a hugely successful act, you're not making any money, and it's not, whatever. And it's a lot of work, but it's enormously fun. And I would recommend anybody be in a band ever in their life. It is really the funnest thing I've ever done. And it also has, and it's also like all of the drama that you want to bring as a performer, you can bring to that project. So it was great. And after a few more years, I had a play that was in the first Fringe Festival in New York, and that was fun and great. But it was just like, it was hard to get an audience. It's hard to get reviews. It was rewarding in a lot of ways, and it's a play that I'm still proud of, but it was just like, oh man, this is a real slog. Like, or I can just be in a band where, like, you just have the club books you and you go play, and you might even get money.
Yeah, and I want to kind of, people that will be watching this kind of probably know New York pretty well. So
sure.
Your big gig was Arlene's Grocery, and
We had a really, really good relationship with Arlene's Grocery, which was a club that's been around, I think, since around 1995, 96. And we started in 97, so they were still pretty early. They really liked us. They were always really good to us. And I think that staff and that management really appreciated a kind of project that was thoughtful. And so for example, if we would approach them and be like, hey, we're going to show a movie, can we have 2 slots, which is unheard of in New York. Like, they don't do that. No small club is like, sure, you can have 2 slots. Like, they would just be like, sure, no problem. And they did that for us forever. Like, they did that for us, even the last time we played there, we did that, which was it was just before the pandemic. We played there however many years ago that was, 3 or 4 years. And so they were really good to us. We had a really good relationship with them. They started a film festival. It was sort of loosely based on a party that me and some of my roommates used to throw on Halloween, where it was just like, bring your own movie. They really liked us, and it was great. It was incredibly rewarding. At that time, there was a lot of great mid-sized clubs in New York, like Mercury Lounge and the Continental and Coney Island High. CBGB's was still around, although, that was not a particularly fun or rewarding experience at that point. But there was a lot of those great kind of medium-sized clubs. But Arlene's was always very sweet. They just had an awesome perspective and a really, really great attitude towards performers. And if they liked you and they thought that you were doing something cool, they would give you a lot of freedom, which was really great.
Are they the same owners?
Yeah.
Where did they come from? Another place, or
2 Irish guys who bought, and strangely, and I'm embarrassed to say that because I haven't been down there in the last couple of years, but that particular block was unique. It's on the Lower East Side. It's on Stanton Street, but that particular block and that building and the buildings next to it were 1 story. There was nothing above them. And there was an era where the Lower East Side was just exploding, and there was high rises going up everywhere. I don't know what's happened there recently, although they're still there. So they had a kind of weird, it was a unique, it was just a unique place in New York, because there's no reason that they shouldn't have had a giant high rise built on top of it, but they didn't. They had a long-term lease. They were just very cool. I mean, I know they went through kind of financial struggles off and on, but they were great. They were always just really cool. They treated performers with dignity, and as if it was like a partnership, not as opposed to in those days when you played CBs, it was kind of the dwindling days of CBs. They were just terrible. You know what I mean? They were just like, it was awful. It was really like it was just a grim kind of reminder of what it had been. There was other clubs that were great, but Arlene's was just very, very cool, very generous and very sweet.
Yeah, still going. I have a friend that's in a band called Haunting Titans.
That's right.
And they just played there. And,
Yeah.
I'd love to go. I've never been, but I'd love to go down and see. So if you go in, you'll see these guys, and I'll say, "Hey, John." And
there's a couple of people there that I still know. I mean, there certainly, we started playing there in 97 or 98, whatever. So there's been turnover. There's been a lot of turnover. So it's certainly not the same crew, but there are a couple of people that I still know. Yeah.
Cool. Staying on Legion. You opened for Tenacious D. Was that a story?
Yeah. So
how did that happen?
Yeah, I don't exactly remember how that happened, but I don't exactly remember how that happened, but we ended up somehow a very early gig, like 8 months after we started as a band. We ended up opening for them at Billboard Live, which is I don't think it's there anymore, but it had been. I can't think of the name of this club. It's the club that's featured in anyway, it's on Sunset Strip. It's like it's a large room, and somehow we got this gig where we opened for them, and it was great. I mean, it was a real eye opener, because in LA, at least at that time, it was like if you were going out to see a band, you had to drive, so you weren't just going to walk out. Whereas New York was hard, because it was like, oh yeah, we're going to show up for your show, but when are you starting? What time did you say it was? I gotta go somewhere. We're gonna leave. We gotta split. LA was kind of like, these people showed up. They were enthusiastic. They all, there was a big crowd for us, even though we were the opener. And it was just cool. It was just really fun and great. Yeah, I don't know how we got. I sincerely don't remember how we got that gig. I know I didn't.
Yeah.
Our drummer.
You got the thumbs up from Jack Black, though.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. They liked us. They thought we were good. They at that time, I think, were still maybe doing the show on HBO, those 15-minute, or maybe it was done, but it was just recently finished. It was around that era.
Right.
And yeah, it was fun.
I think he did a movie or something like that. But the first time I saw Jack Black was on Northern Exposure as a football player on a high school football team.
Right.
And then Explosion.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so Legion's happening. It's off and on. You guys get together once in a while, and then you're employed very well by the. Tell us what you were doing with your artistic prowess.
Sure. So when I got to New York, I worked for a couple of years, just temping, doing whatever I could. And then I was lucky enough to get into a production studio at a company called Princeton Review, which was like test prep. And that was an amazing group of people. It was just this weird group of misfits. We were all kind of underpaid, but it was a really interesting model, because it was an independent company. The people that ran it were reasonably young, and so they kind of took a chance on oddball. It wasn't like none of us had come out of college or whatever being like, I want to work in production. So I got a job there, and out of that, I got a band. I was dating somebody for a long time that I knew out of that production studio. It was just a really amazing group of people, and many of them are still very dear friends. And then from that, I got kind of recruited to go work at an advertising agency, and I've since worked in advertising now since 1999, I think.
Yeah. Cool.
So I've been a retoucher. I was a retoucher for a really long time. And then I kind of graduated to become an art director.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you're working for a California company, right?
Yeah, I work for a company that's actually based in upstate New York, but the office I work for is in Oakland. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to do those hours.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
okay. And then during that time, tell us about how Set Collective came about. We're going to get to your Shakespeare experience in amongst other ones.
Sure.
Actually,
Sure.
let's move back to you kept doing shows, but you did some Shakespeare out of Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yeah. I ended up getting introduced to a small but very very sweet Shakespeare company out in South Park Slope
Right,
called South Brooklyn Shakespeare.
right.
As far as Set Collective goes, that was that goes back a little further. So I was in. I met a playwright, and we were literally just like drinking buddies at a bar that I lived next to on the in the East Village.
Hmm.
Um, really good playwright named Jonathan Yukich. He had a show in the Fringe Festival, and he asked me if I wanted to be part of it. I was not actually on stage. I was literally this kind of voice of God off stage, but I did it live every night. That show actually got reviewed in the New York Times.
Wow.
But one of the actors in it, this very sweet, very great actor, Doug Paulson. At one point, it came out that he was working with um, one of our classmates, Marika Betts, and so suddenly it was like there was all these connections that suddenly came about, and Marika and her husband Joe came to see the show. They asked me if I wanted to participate in this kind of collective, this acting collective that they were all working in, along with Doug. At the time, I couldn't because it was meeting on the same night as I was having rehearsals. But about a year later, that had shifted, and they asked me again, and I started working with. I started working with them, and it was great. Um, it was just like it was a group of I think about 6 or 7 people, maybe total. Really rewarding and interesting. It was one of these kind of projects where um there were no kind of set boundaries. It was just like, hey, somebody's going to bring something, or maybe somebody's written something. At a certain point, we decided that we wanted to maybe mount a show. Everybody had opinions about what that show should be. I brought in an adaptation that I had done of Macbeth, and we ended up doing that. But I don't want to get ahead if whatever. But that's how I ended up getting into Second. It was just pure coincidence that I one of the actors that I'd been in with this Fringe Festival project knew 2 people that I had known from college,
Hmm.
and so it was just pure coincidence, but it was a really great experience.
Yeah. So get the Scottish play. I went to see it, and I am particularly entranced with your interpretation of it, which I'm going to have you explain. But I saw it on Theater Row,
Yeah,
which was the Lion. You at the
yeah, I was
Lion?
at the Lion. Yeah,
At the Lion, which is basically a proscenium theater, but it has the smallness of the raked seating for the
yes,
audience, and I fell in love with the staging and the stage
thanks.
itself, and just the experience. This is the stuff that Jerry Crasser from UConn was teaching us, getting the soul of the play and putting it into I think there were only 5 different actors,
Yeah,
and having them shift around and do the stuff. And I they're doing it now, but I think you guys were one of the first in the millennium, that had it going. I know there's been past stuff and blah blah blah, but I've never seen anything like this. And so start from the germination of it, and where it through the through line of the development, and you had a culminating production of it, and how you felt about that.
yeah, sure. So I had always wanted to do Macbeth. It's really one of my favorite plays. Um, when we got into Set Collective and there was talk about like, well, let's do an actual production and everybody could kind of bring their suggestions. I thought about, there was at that point there was 5 of us in that group, and I thought there's 5 acts in Macbeth. The interesting thing about that play is that one, he changes pretty radically from act to act, but also what's interesting about that is Lady Macbeth is not in Act 4. So that made me think like, okay, you could switch out of those 5 actors, you could have every actor assume the lead role for an act, including whomever was playing Lady Macbeth, because she's not in Act 4. So then I sat down to be like, okay, how does this work? And I went through a very, very complex process of being like, because the goal was, if somebody was playing Banquo, for example, I wanted them to play Banquo through all of it. Or if somebody was playing Macduff, I wanted them to play Macduff through all of it. So I was able to do that successfully, with the exception of Ross, which is a really great role. And I'd love to go back to it sometime and see if I could figure it out, but I couldn't quite make that work. That was the only real main character that I couldn't like jigger into this, like, yeah, the same actor is going to play him through all of these acts. So basically it was like the 5 of us switched, we traded roles, but the idea was that every actor, all 5 of us, would play Macbeth for 1 act. And it was great because Act 4 is like, yeah, the person who's playing Lady Macbeth can play Macbeth. It's great. She doesn't appear in it. It's perfect. So it was anyway, I presented it, and I was very kind of, I kind of approached it very academically and with a lot of thought. And when I presented it to the group, they were like, yeah. And I came in with like costume design, and I was really like thoughtful about it, and they were like, yeah, this works and it makes sense. And so we co-produced it. We all kind of chipped in and got the Lion, which is a great space. I mean, it's as you said, it is proscenium, but it has a really tall, it's a really tall stage. And it's kind of narrow, and so it has this very kind of Gothic feeling to it. It's a really perfect space for it. We had workshopped it at a space that's kind of associated with, it's not part of, but it's associated with NYU. The set was very minimal. It was really just this kind of like lycra, this long lycra sheet that hung from the ceiling that the ghosts could kind of poke through, and you could tear it and kind of come through it. And at the end, by the end, it's just tattered. So there's very little. It was really just chairs and seat. And it was a really, really great experience. We workshopped it for a while. We all felt very confident in it, confident enough that we were like, okay, let's do this as a real production. We brought it to the line. We did it. It was not a success. I mean, we made a small profit on it, which was great. But again, it's hard to get people. It's really hard to get an audience in New York City. It's hard to get an audience for a play that people think they know or they've seen or whatever, if there's not a known name in it or whatever. But it went well enough that we made a small profit on it, and it was incredibly rewarding, and I'm really proud of it. I'd like to put that script, I think it needs a little more tweaking, but I'd like to put it together because I think it would be a really good academic
it is, yes,
script of Macbeth, because you only need 5 actors in it, and it makes sense.
Yes.
And I also think it's a good exploration of how that character goes through his transformation from Act 1 to Act 5. And I was lucky enough to get Act 5, which is the funnest, because later, like a year and a half later, I got to play Macbeth in its entirety. I was cast in South Brooklyn Shakespeare's production of it, but in that particular production, it was like I got to be Act 5, where he's just nuts. He's just off the wall, and he gets the tomorrow speech, and it's like it's the cherry on top. That act is just a blast to play. So
what was great is watching you, and you also got to play the porter.
Yes, that's right.
Which I remember. So John is an amazing comic actor, but he's also an amazing and everything in between. But you got the porter, which I was guffawing at, and then him at the end, which was such a great. You just went on both sides of the railroad track on that. And about schools, I do think that you should tour with it. Maybe the tri-state area, but the private schools. I think the private schools for the English departments are reading that particular play.
Yeah.
But you can check that out, obviously, and see if they are, and says, oh my God, here's this interpretation, which can be, transportable.
Yes.
You can bring it from place to place to place to place. You just need the actors to be available, stuff like that. So that would be cool. I wanted to talk to you about the phenomenon of GoFundMe, which I think just came out at that time, or maybe a couple of years before.
Yeah.
How did you utilize that?
It was relatively new. It had been around for a little while, but we did get a bunch of funding through it, and it made it possible. I was not really the main kind of person behind it, but I remember we made a short video that was basically like, hey, this is what we're doing, and here's how you donate. But we were able to become a not for profit, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you have to do that to be on GoFundMe.
Right.
And so I'd actually forgotten about that until you just said it, but it was a major source of it. Like we did get a bunch of money from it, and we met our goal, and it made it possible. Because it was the funny thing about
which
that
is mostly the rental of the theater.
Yes,
right?
exactly. It's a very, very minimal piece as far as costuming and set. There's no set really. There's interestingly, the most expensive thing about that every day was that we had to get a new piece of lycra, and it was like 40 feet tall or something. So so we had to get these every day because we were destroying it every day. We had to buy this new like white pristine sheet of lycra, which was not cheap. I mean, it wasn't that expensive, but that was the biggest production expense daily. It was just the rental of the theater and also like insurance and everything else that comes along with the theater rental in New York. And because it was on 42nd Street, like that, it's a great theater, and the staff there was fantastic. They
were great.
Yeah.
So would you suggest to our entrepreneurs out there that want to do something like this to do a GoFundMe, or do you think it's worth it?
Sure. Yes. I personally, if I was doing it myself, I don't think I have enough connections where I would feel confident that it would succeed. But luckily we had people in that cast that knew that it would be fine, that they had enough connections and people would donate and whatever. And so I think you just have to kind of ask yourself, like, do I have the heat? Do I have the personal connections to make this worthwhile? But there's no harm in doing it. I mean,
so along those lines, with Set Collective's philosophy and what you wanted to do with it, you weren't willing to do a lesser, I don't want to say a lesser theater, but a theater that's not out of the city, like a Poughkeepsie or something like that. Or something.
No, I don't think that was true. I don't think that was ever a consideration. I think it was just more like we all lived in the city.
Okay.
And I don't think we ever thought about it that way. I mean, I remember we did apply to a couple of I don't know what they were. They were kind of like residencies, like art residencies up in New England, maybe upstate New York, and I don't think we got accepted, but just to like develop it. But I think we'd be happy to do it. I think we would have been happy to do it anywhere. It was just that we all lived in New York, so that's what we focused on.
Well, then you're going to get an audience too, obviously. So it's a concentrated theatrical area, so I think that was good too. And I think you guys had some good audiences, and that worked out well. So I thought it was a great experience. And then since then, you played Caliban in The Tempest, you played Oberon over in Sharon, Connecticut, did some monologues, so in the Bard Room, we kind of talk about what is is there anything about putting on a Shakespeare production now that is more attractive than it used to be, or is it the same? Or, a lot of people are trying to educate the younger audiences about the whole thing, and there are times where I've seen productions where they do it, with a disco beat, or they do it, in 70s fringe, or they do it that type of thing, and they're losing the soul of the play. I mean, you've been around. Anybody, how do you feel about how it is these days? And has film made a difference with it? And does it ebb and flow? I think it ebb and flows. But
I agree. I don't have a great answer to this, but I do think with Shakespeare, it's like, it's so evergreen and it's so resilient that if you truly have a great vision of one of those plays that is like, in Disco Fringe or whatever,
yeah.
if you really have a legitimately great vision, I think it can work, which has always been the case. I think often that doesn't work out. You know what I mean? Like, often
Yeah.
it feels like, okay, maybe this shouldn't have been put on this. But I think if you've got it, go for it. I mean, also as an actor, like, I'm not a very technical Shakespeare actor. I've met lots of very technical kind of academic Shakespeare actors, and they're great. And so that's not an insult. I think it's just, for me, and by that I mean actors that are super super focused on, like, scansion and etc. For me, it's like, you already have one very regimented part of it, which is you cannot change a single word. Like, you cannot change a word, unless you've just gone up on a line or whatever.
Yeah.
But as an actor, you are not changing anything that is written on that page. So for me, it's really more about, like, okay, because I'm regimented to this text, I really want to bring whatever emotion I can to it. And as far as what you're talking about, I think that if that comes through, regardless of the production, it can be great. So I don't really know what the state of it is, but I think that it's been around for 400 plus years. So
Right. Well, part of what I was saying, as an addendum to that, is there's a lot of smaller versions of these plays, and you were just mentioned about cutting,
yeah,
some of these lines. So, what's your opinion on that? Should we do a 2 hour Hamlet?
yeah.
Should we do a 4.5 hour Hamlet, or anything in between?
Yeah, I think it depends. Again, I think you have to be very careful. I think you have to be very cautious, but at the same time, I was in a reading several years ago of just an unabridged Hamlet, and that is a long show. I mean, that is
Yeah.
a really long show.
Right.
That's not a criticism. It's just
No.
that, I think most audiences are not necessarily prepared for it if you do it as it is, the unabridged text. So
Right.
I don't think it's wrong. I just think you need somebody that's thoughtful. I think you need a thoughtful approach to how you're cutting stuff out of.
Well, I think you're also talking about the audience that you're doing it for.
Yeah, yeah.
That I remember my brother in, was 1983, maybe something. He went to see the complete Oresteia,
Wow.
I think it was at Yale or Harvard, or one of those
Yeah.
places. And it was one day, one
Yeah.
play, one day, another, that type of thing. And you were committed to
Yeah.
watching all three. He enjoyed it. He loved it. But, and then, they bring over Nicholas Nickleby, which they do the same thing, from England. It's like it's 9 hours.
Yeah.
The whole thing,
Right.
9 hours.
Right.
That type of thing. And I just don't think people are going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
And
No.
so I think Hamlet's about 4.5.
Yeah.
If you're not cutting anything, and you can have 2 hours, then, or 2.5 hours, then 2 hours. How are you gonna,
Yeah.
2 intermissions or whatever? Does it matter? That type of thing. So, I think obviously it's the audience, but I do think that at times make them sit through it. I mean,
For sure.
it's a
Yeah,
piece
for sure.
of art,
Yes.
so that's been an argument that has been passed forth on and on. And when I have done my readings of and scholarship of certain plays with my actors on Zoom and stuff like that, I'm saying, this Ludovico scene is cut. Do we like it? Should we put it back in?
Right.
Are we missing it?
Right.
Even though Depardieu played it, do we want to cut it? That type of thing. Or this scene is cut or that scene is cut. And they take, they've taken Lear and just put it down to 1 or 2 lines where he's going insane, that type of thing. So these are arguments that we have back and forth. And I know you're staunch, but you also will do, what is needed.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I really love Richard II. It's not a show that you see very often,
Yeah,
but
I'd love to do that.
it's incredibly, the language in that show is incredibly beautiful, and the speeches in that show are incredibly sophisticated and beautiful. But it's like I don't know if somebody, I mean, I think you have to really want to see that piece. You know what I mean? Like I think it's hard to understand what an audience wants to see. And with something like Hamlet, I think it's such a greatest hit. You know what I mean? That it's like, I don't know what the audience wants when they come to see Hamlet. Like, I don't think that's even possible to know what they want.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do a slightly lesser known piece, you can kind of get away with it and be like, hey, you should hear this.
Sure. Yeah, I hear you. Richard II is much shorter. Anyways, and it's great. I want to direct it at some point or whatever. But I was in a symposium about Hamlet, different versions of it. How did we attack it? And Hudson Valley Shakespeare Company was there, and they were talking about it. And other people were, some college people were talking about it. And I remember saying, do you want to hang out with this guy for 4.5 hours?
Yeah.
I mean, depending on it, if Giamatti's doing it, or if, or if someone of the right age is doing it, that type of thing. Do you want to hang out with this guy? Do you want to go through all of his stuff and just, go through the whole thing? And are you willing to do that? Where I think the ideas these days are small doses. I'll take it in small doses. Especially the streaming, channels and stuff like that. Well, I did 1 episode of it, so it's all small doses. And of course we do it out of our living room, and we're used to that type of stuff now. So, that's another thing. Sometimes I'll watch a big one that I'm either directing or looking at, and I don't have time to see it in a full day. And of course these people did, they had, for some reason, they had attention spans that were much, much longer than we have now. There are reasons behind that, but so
well, it's also an impossible role. I mean, you know what I mean? It is an impossibly challenging role. Like, you need an actor that really understands that role, and they need to be kind of youngish. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really, really challenge. Like, if you have somebody that really knows what they're doing, I think you can sit through that whole thing, because it's amazing. It's an amazing work. It's one of the greatest works of the English language, obviously. But it's like it really requires an actor that knows what they're doing, and I think that's hard. Like, that's a really hard role. It's hard to get the right age. It's just a challenge.
Because it's interesting, it's a college age. But what's a college age in Elizabethan times? And they're dying at 35 or 40, that type of thing. But and people have, I'll end the Hamlet stuff right now, but I saw Mel Gibson's, and I actually liked it. One of the reasons I liked it, I just love the rest of the cast and Zeffirelli's people, that type of thing. But I really liked the way he cut it. I just loved the way he cut it. It got the soul of it, and it just, it was, I think students should take a look at that one.
That's funny. I remember seeing it too at the time. I haven't seen it since. I saw it in the theater, but I
Yeah.
remember liking it too. I mean, you have to get past the barrier of him being way too old for the part, but
Right.
I did think that it was a good product. It was a good,
Right.
honest.
Right. And then you see Branagh, which basically went to 4.5 hours.
Yes.
And that's just another view of everything. Great
Right.
cast on that stuff. So cool. We could go on and on. But John will be in Connecticut probably before that, but even then, and when we're doing a reading of Death Trap at Theater Works, in
No,
South
no, no,
Barry.
no. Amadeus.
Amadeus. I'm sorry, not Death Trap. I was just looking at it behind me. No, no.
No, no, Robin.
No,
No,
no. Sorry,
no.
my fault.
I shouldn't be the one to correct you on this,
But you are.
but I
That's why you're
did.
here.
But I did. Yeah.
But you did. So thanks, John.
Yeah, of
This is
course.
great stuff. I think a lot of people are going to get interested in this, and for everything that they do with the Bard and beyond. So hang on, we'll talk after. And thank you very much for everybody coming to the Bard Room, and we will see you soon.